Welcome, Richard.
Thank you, Amir. I've been
So,
preparing for 50 years for this.
yeah, this is the test. The examination will be on this book,
Oh, yeah.
um,
Okay.
just on the first
Can I
600
call a
pages.
friend?
No, no calling a friend, and please turn your cell phone off. Um, yeah, I've actually only got so far as chapter one, but that felt like enough to um, warrant a good conversation. And the theme that really struck me from that was just how integrated it is between life and um, what in other circles might be called awakening or seeing something beyond just everyday. Uh,
Should we give a little introduction to what the book is first?
yeah, that would make perfect sense. So I'll
Yeah.
just hold it up one more time. It's called The Hierarchy of Heaven and Earth.
This is a book that Douglas Harding wrote in the 40s, 1940s, and he spent 10, 15 years on it. I mean, for a period of 5, 6, 7 years, it was 14 hours a day, no holidays. And in 1943, after 10 years of exploration, when he was in India working as an architect, well, he was in the army by then, he uh, he was asking the question, "Who am I?" And are you okay with this, Amir? Amir, just to
Yeah, it's
introduce it?
perfect.
Yeah.
Perfect.
So he had got the idea that he was what he was depended on the range of the observer. So he was like an onion with layers. And as the observer came up to him, so his humanity gave way to cells, gave way to molecules, atoms, particles. So the nearest that the observer could get, he was almost nothing. But he assumed that he would be sort of nothing, like the mystics say, at center, but this was not relying on the mystics, this was relying on science and what science tells you about yourself. If you take seriously the idea that what you are changes with range, relativity. Now, he understood that at the center, probably there was nothing, but he didn't want to accept it without verification because his whole approach was you must be able to verify this. It's not good enough to believe or take someone's word on what you are, because this is you, and where you're living from, make where you think you're living from makes a huge difference in terms of how you relate to others in the world. And then in 1943, in a way, he stopped thinking and he just looked and he noticed he couldn't see his head. And there was the nothing full of everything. And then he worked for another 8 years working out how this made sense in terms of science and psychology, because it's such a radically different view of the self from the normal conventional view. And that book came out of it, that huge book. I mean, the original is very big. He then, in a matter of months, condensed it down to publishable size. And it was then had an introduction by C.S. Lewis, the writer, and was published by Faber and Faber in 1952, I think it was. And so that book there, we published first in 1999. Douglas thought he would never have that published. It was so big. And now it's on Amazon, and so it's available. It's just the greatest book, in my view, in terms of that subject of philosophy, and it's a game changer. And so Amir has been reading it, and every so often he tries to get me to explain it. To save him reading it, I think.
No, no,
But
I'm
anyway,
I'm committed now. I've been doing a chapter a day, which is about a page a day.
pages
So,
away.
there's 600 pages, so that's 2 years, would be a very enjoyable 2 years. So,
Yeah, I've
yeah,
read it. I've read it dozens of times. I mean, many times anyway. And I first read it in 1976, I think, at Douglas's house with him and talked to him. So it's just a tremendous book. So um, I think the art today is probably to not go down too many rabbit holes, but try and remain comprehensible.
yeah. No, I agree. And anyone here that if we say something that you haven't understood, because I've been familiarizing myself with the terminology of Headless Way and the perspective that Douglas brings for a few years now. And then what can happen is one can forget when we're using vocabulary that is very familiar to us, but perhaps isn't so familiar to others. So it's helpful actually if you just put in the chat of like, what on earth did you just say? Um, but the other thing I wanted to show off about the book is that in every margin, he's got incredible range, don't know how clear that is, range of quotes and references and drawings. And it's, I mean, just the quotes alone, or at the start of every chapter, there's a whole range of quotes from mystics and scientists and poets about the theme. And you could make a book just of those quotes.
Mm.
Like
Yeah,
it's phenomenal. So
yeah,
um,
yeah.
shame I'm not getting royalties for selling this book. I'm quite.
To read the book is cultural education. He was so broadly read around this subject and had such a deep understanding of the issues and found all the relevant quotations from all over and put them in the book. So yeah, it's a mine of quotations. Yeah.
And I advertised this talk as being about integrating awakening with everyday life. So just to promise everyone, we will get there. Um, but just a couple of preliminaries. One thing I found very interesting as well, based on what you just said, that he's started writing it. Would he have started writing it in the 30s then, as early as the 30s?
Well, in a way, yes. It depends when you think of him starting that particular book, but his inquiry into the question, who am I, started in the early 30s, really. And I would see that book as a result of that 20-year exploration, really. It took 20 years to work it out. Yeah. So there was an earlier book, The Meaning and Beauty of the Artificial, which he wrote in about 1935 or something. So that was the beginning, really.
Hmm.
So yeah, and a very deeply dedicated, one-pointed effort. I mean, tremendous energy, tremendous energy. Yeah.
Yeah, amazing. Um, and one thing that struck me reading it, just I have started the second chapter, is how clearly it's one of the clearest um, and striking expressions of what today is called the hard problem of consciousness, which was a term that I understood to have been coined, I think, in the 80s or 90s by David Chalmers, and really crystallized the problem of if we consider that, if we think that consciousness is an epiphenomena of physical atoms and a result of complexity, that's a really hard thing to bridge of like, well, how do these synapses in the brain and chemical movements and electricity and whatever give rise to experience. And so I thought that was more of a modern. Um, I hadn't recognized before how clearly that had been understood. In retrospect, of course, it had been understood, but people have talked about David Chalmers as somehow making some great leap forward of really making it clear this is a big problem, everyone. But it's said very maybe the term is having coined a term that is short and clear is maybe useful.
Mm.
But reading that chapter on how incomprehensible it is for light to travel from the sun and then travel through my eye and the image to get flipped upside down and end up in the dark recesses of the back of my brain as electrical chemical signals and then somehow transform into this. It, yeah,
Yes,
he says it
that's
so
what
clearly and it's
I know.
almost shocking to read.
Yeah, very simply put, the mix-up that science gets into trying to explain perception. And Douglas does point out that you can never find consciousness out there in people. You never actually come across it. And the only place that you can come across it is where you are. And this is a very good thing in a way, because then you are in a unique position to look and see what consciousness is. And later on in the late 60s and 70s, he developed his experiments to get people just to actually more easily access that. Look for your head, point back and look at what you're looking out of and describe for yourself what your consciousness is like. Well, it's boundless. It's space for the world. It's aware. And no one outside you can see that. So that's the hard problem, is that no one can see from the outside what consciousness is like. But the soft problem is that you are consciousness and you can look for yourself. In that, I don't know if it's in the first chapter, but very soon on it in the hierarchy, he approaches that question that you can never actually know for sure that anyone else is conscious. And he does say that anyone who's not actually considered that has missed something very important. It leads in a way to solipsism, that the only consciousness you're aware of is your own. But there are two things really that come out of that, is that your consciousness is not yours, it includes everything. So it's not an isolating consciousness that separates you, it's one that includes everything. And secondly, that we all, for all intents and purposes, act as if others are conscious. And you couldn't function if you didn't. And so he acknowledges that issue and then in a way moves on. And the rest of the book is acting as if others are conscious, because that's the only way you can become aware of yourself, is through the eyes of others, self-consciousness. So yeah, he looks into that question, and then, as you say, he looks at the story of perception that science tells, and shows how it defeats itself in a way.
Mm.
I'm not sure whether to go down the rabbit hole of trying to explain that, but it's very simply put. It's also, I think, in On Having No Head, more simply put in that short book. So well worth looking at. Yeah.
And he hadn't yet coined the phrase "the headless way" by the time of
No,
writing
no,
this book. And
no,
so did
that
he
came and he
revise
hated
that?
it. Yeah.
Because he talks about that he can't find his head in the very first chapter. So would he have revised the first chapters once he'd made that realization? Because you said
Uh,
he'd been working on this for some time before,
well,
say,
he
1943.
realized he couldn't see his head in 1943. And it was a combination of circumstances that led to that insight or that seeing. And actually, I was just reading some notes I'd made on that period in his life when he wrote the hierarchy, just not to do with this conversation, but synchronicity, I suppose. And the first version started with noticing he had no head. And he then changed it so that it starts with, I have a head. It starts with, what am I? Society tells me, common sense, he says, common sense tells me I'm a person sitting at a desk writing. In other words, with a head and a background and there you are. And he then says, surely nothing could have gone wrong so far in this question, who am I? Common sense tells me I'm a person. And then he says, but wait a minute, look for myself. And he looks down, and his body's headless, and he's not a person, he's space of the world, and so on. And
I like the
there's
bit where
that.
he checks under the table as well.
Yeah, I know, he's got legs under the table. I know.
But no head.
No head, but
Yeah,
no
with no
head.
head under the table hiding. Yeah.
Yeah. So you, I think, were in a conversation I had with you before, maybe enjoying the fact that he has both sides of the equation. He, from the outside, is a person; from the inside, he's space for the world, and both are true. It's not that one is, more important in a way than the other, although one is primary and one is secondary. But what he shall I just give a little introduction to that first chapter,
Yeah,
Amir?
why not? Yeah.
All right. Well, he
Well, could I say one thing that
yeah,
frames it in what struck me, and then you can dive in, which is what struck me is because his work was architecture, wasn't it?
yes.
And what struck me again and again in each subchapter is how he draws great significance from the architecture of perception, things that other people might go, well, that's trivial, like, well, I can't see my own head, that's trivial. Um, he finds great significance in that, or in depth, that we don't perceive depth the way we see height and breadth. He draws great significance from that. So I found that quite exciting that he takes how perception shows up as very significant. And yeah, carry on, and we can get into some of the aspects of that in a second.
Well, that's it. That's the core of it. He is going to go by his own experience. And if you don't, you simply going by other people's experience, which is hearsay and secondhand and off-center. Well, let me step back a bit, because the spirit of the whole book is wonder and curiosity. And it is, in his terms, the realization or recognition or acknowledgement that you've happened, that you are, and that this is something that most people take for granted, and it is the least valued thing. We value, of course, our relationships, or how much money we're making, or our comfort, or peace, all of those. But underneath it is the fact that you are. And this is overlooked and dismissed as kind of, well, yeah, okay. But Douglas Harding had this feeling that it was kind of weird to be, that you couldn't explain it, that where did you come from? How did this happen? And that was one of the streams of inspiration for him, wanting to look into what it was like to be while he was alive. You've got this one chance to question, to appreciate that you are. You know, in our busy, busy lives, when we're going to make a living and do all the things we need to do, of course, most people probably don't really stop and think, who am I? How did this, where did this come from? Who wrote the script for this? You know, all of that. So that book is in a way him stopping and assessing for himself what he was. But what he does is he understands that he is in a special moment in history when science has appeared. And science is, if you like, the reliance on sense experience. You, instead of as the medieval schoolman did, you would look it up in Aristotle if you wanted to know if a big rock fell quicker than a smaller rock. Galileo didn't look it up in Aristotle, he looked at the two rocks falling. And that's the spirit of science. You go back to the primary data. You don't go to Aristotle or Aquinas or somebody else. So this is something that is quite new in human history, is this determination to actually trust your own senses, and that being the foundation of your understanding, rather than what somebody said sometime who you've no idea if they were drunk or not. Right? You know, so at the time that Douglas was writing this book, science had been around for a few centuries. So there was, by then, quite a lot of data, of information about the world and about himself. So he was probably at a point, the first time in history, really, where there was enough data to actually assemble a new view of the universe. Because the previous views of the universe, Dante's, you know, many levels, or the other ones, are not based on science, on observation. They're based on, you know, whatever they were, some theory or something, and they worked well enough. But Douglas Harding, when he was asking this question, decided, you know, partly his upbringing, where he'd been deeply conditioned to believe what the elders in his religion said, and then he left, he'd had enough. And so he was not going to go now to some other authority. Science is the authority is observation, and you keep testing and you keep looking. And so this is the spirit of this book, is this deep curiosity and astonishment at being, and this determination while he was alive to stop and look and to work out a credible view of his place in the universe that was credible. In other words, it relied on science and not on Aristotle or something like that. And so when you start the book, the first thing is, what am I? You know, this deeply, deeply wonderful question. If you're bitten by that question, then you're blessed in a way. You're waking up to the fact that you are, and it's impossible to explain yourself. You're, you know, deeply, deeply. And so he starts the book and says, all right, well, what am I? What am I? I'm real, you know, I'm alive. I don't want to die without looking into this question of my own being now. What am I? Well, common sense says I'm a man sitting at a desk writing, and look under the, you know, whatever. And he said, surely nothing can have gone wrong by now. He said, but let me look for myself. Oh my God, I'm a headless body with the world on my shoulders. So he then puts forward a little bit the first person view, his direct experience. And so he said, you know, he's lost his head. The next step is called the head found, as I remember it. And he says, well, when I look down, I don't see my head. But when I look out, I discover I've got countless heads. I've got heads in the mirror. I've got heads twisted in spoons, other people out there, and they're arranged around me at 5 feet, 6 feet, 3 feet, not really close. You only see them. And very close ones are very big, and then they get smaller, and then you get the whole body, and then further away, and they shrink. So this magical region around him where his head appears or his human body appears. So that's the a kind of you. It's like stepping into Alice in Wonderland. And he said, anything, any surface you polish, you'll find your head in it. And you'll find your head all the way around, but never at the center. So there he's starting to expand on that initial experience. So I could go on, but what do you think, Amir?
Well, I think it's brilliant, and I think again one thing to draw out, because I know I have friends who would say, who would take the common sense view of like, well, of course they're just reflections and it doesn't mean anything, and and again, Douglas derives great meaning and significance from the fact that these heads show up around me, but not where I'm looking from, that they change in size and shape, and he inquires into that. It reminds me a little bit of Jung. I don't know if he would read Jung, or there was some resonance there of in the same way that someone might interpret their dream. Let's say if I was to have a dream where, oh, I could see my head floating all around me in different shapes and sizes, and some of them were very close and big, and some of them were far away, and then they would disappear. And I went to a psychiatrist or whatever and said, that was my dream. What do you think it means? The way they would interpret that might be similar to how he interprets life. Like it's significant how life is showing up, and to inquire into that. So I don't know if that is something that he or anyone else has ever expressed in
Well,
quite that same way. That it's not
yeah,
just, oh, it's not just, oh, that's just mechanics of how light travels and blah blah blah.
no. Well, I think that what Douglas is doing is saying before we work out what it means, let's actually find out what it is. And then the meaning will come. But
Yeah,
first, let's observe how it's given, even if it flies in the face of what we've been told or common sense tells us, which it does.
yeah,
Um, yeah. So you see, that might be a good moment to just to bring in the idea of reflection and projection here.
yeah.
Yeah. So
Or one that is in that chapter is the fact that there's always an equivalency of our view of each other. So if I'm at 6 feet from you, I see your whole body, but you see my whole body. And then if I step 100 meters away, you're a bit of a speck for me, but I'm a speck for you. And if I get really close to you, then you're like a big head, but I'm a big head for you. And there was something, maybe I projected it, but something very beautiful and spiritual I can't remember his exact phrase, but he says there's a law. The symmetry always holds. There's a law. It's
Yes,
like
law of equality. Yeah.
you can't be bigger than someone else in a way or smaller than them. It's just built in.
Yes. Well, that fits in really with reflection and projection. So the way that he introduces that, I mean, it's so beautifully organized, this book. The whole book, it's a master work. It's a master class in organization, in detail, in overall pattern. It will go down in history as one of the very great books on this subject. So he first of all he said, well, I in a way, all right. So he says, so when I look out, I can't see my head, but then at this range around me, as you're saying, I see all my many heads, and in the nearer part of that zone around me, the heads get very big, and then they, in the further out towards the, outside of that zone, they get smaller, and then you see the whole body, and then it shrinks to a dot. So there's this human region around you where you can see your human appearance with a head. And then he very neatly says that, and if my friend, something like this, comes into the room, my friend will also report he can see my head. So the mirror shows me, the screen now shows me where my head is. Out there, I've got a head on the screen, see? And then my friend walks into the room and says, yeah, well, I can see it out here as well, you see. And you can't see that, but he reports. So that's where you accept his what he says as true, you see. So that region is called the human region. Now he says that the thing is that my friend who sees my head there is not content to keep it there, but projects it back on me. So this is reflection and projection. So here's a way of thinking about it, that reflection is like a mirror, and that your single eye now is like a mirror. It is sometimes called the empty mirror in Zen, I think. And in other traditions, it's likened to a mirror. Your true nature is like a mirror. And this is the glassy essence, this clear reflecting glass, if you like, as a metaphor, but it receives the whole world. And a mirror receives it flat. It's all here. You see, it's given right here. So I receive your face here, but if I take up the position of the observer, I'm not content to keep it. I project it back, because if I point at where your face is, I don't point here, I point there. And so I receive your face here, but then I project it back, you see. And you do the same. So you're in receipt of my face out there, but you say, oh no, it's at your center. And this is where we receive and project our appearances. And this is related to what you're saying, that you see, if you're observing me from 6 feet, well, I see you as a person and you see me as a person. And I project that back on you and you project that back on me. But if we are observers that are, you know, a few million, a couple of million light years away, or a couple of light years away, whatever it is. When I look at the, out at the sky, I see a star, you see, and I receive this image of the star here, but then I say it's 2 light years away or 4 light years away over there. So it's both here and there. And if I imagine what I look like from that star, I'm not Richard. I'm a star as well. Yeah. So that takes it into that side of things. So that could get quite complicated, I think.
Well, no, that's kind of perfect segue because one of the things I wanted to speak about was his observations about um, depth. Uh, I do wonder though if it's worth just doing a couple of minutes of experiments as either a refresher or introduction. So when you talk about the single eye, um, shall we do that experiment real quick so that lingo's introduced into the conversation?
Yeah, we could do a couple of things.
And then there's some stuff about depth, which which I'll bring up after that.
Yes. Well, I mean, it's worth doing one or two of these experiments, and let's do them together. You know, you and me and everyone else. And I encourage you to do it. People sometimes don't want to do them; they feel embarrassed or they're childish. But um, that's they're not childish; they're childlike. Anyway, the whole point is to look. So you directly point out at the screen, say, and you use your finger to point, and you look along your finger, and you can see you're pointing at someone's face. I'm pointing at my face. And that's an observation. That's like, you know, scientific observation. You're having a look. Now, what do you see there? And you look. You don't ask Amir or Richard or your grandmother. You look for you see. And right now, what you're going to do is turn your finger directly around 180 degrees back at where you're looking from, and you look now to see what's here. And I don't see anything here. And if I'm going to describe it, I say it's like space or empty or capacity for what I'm aware of there. And that's that two-way, that's that reversing the direction of attention. And then this space, we call it single eye. And so on the screen, you can see two little peepholes, as it were. You see, so you're looking out and you see those, but you reverse your attention back and just bring your hands around the whole edge, and it's one eye, one opening. And my hands go around the whole field of view, and they're huge, and you can make them disappear into the nothing and come out of the nothing. That's the heart of the hierarchy of heaven and earth, is look for yourself. Now, when you observe this about yourself, that you're headless, that you're single-eyed, that it's different in this direction from that, then inasmuch as you accept others are conscious, which I do, then you must assume they're in the same condition, that they don't see their own heads, that they're looking out of one opening, that their view out is different from yours. It's a different angle on the world, but where they're looking from is the same consciousness. And so then when you're talking with someone, you're understanding that where you are at your center, so to speak, there's nothing, and at their center there's nothing, and that my nothing appears over there in your center as Richard, and your nothing broadcasts and appears over here as Amir, if I'm looking at Amir. So the nothing is kind of broadcasting to itself. And my, I'll give you just a little, something I love about this, is that if you go by that metaphor of a kind of radio station broadcasting a program, like a TV program, and the radio station is nothing, and it broadcasts, and you pick up the message at that range, and you're picking up Richard. Now, this message has taken time to get to you, and it might be just a fraction of a second, but it takes time. Now, if you approached me and observed what I was at a closer range, in other words, you would be intercepting the message I'm broadcasting at an earlier stage. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So, and when you come up to me and get very close, you'll find I'm made of cells. And then if you come even closer and intercept the messages and even closer earlier, because it takes time to travel, you see. At an even earlier stage, I'm a molecule. And even earlier, I am a particle. So the message evolves as it travels. And it evolves like evolution. Particle, you know, atom, molecule, cell, person. Now, if you go further away from me, who is not Richard here, I'm this empty station transmitting a message, broadcasting a message, you see. If you go out and say at the region of the moon or something, at that range, then the message has had longer to travel. and it evolves as it travels. And by the time, uh, when you intercept it at that later stage of its transmission, I have evolved, the message has evolved from particles to molecules to cells to person, then to society, then to the planet. From the moon, at that range, the message that I'm broadcasting is planetary. And if you go further away to intercept the message at an even greater range, is observation. It's no longer planet. The other planets and the sun come into view and it coalesces into a star, and then all the other stars come into view and coalesce into a galaxy. And so your identity evolves as the observer retreats, because your identity is not a fixed thing. At center, there's nothing. And it is you're broadcasting and the image is picked up and it's different at every stage. And this is relativity, that what you broadcast, it depends on where and when the observer intercepts it and picks it up, you see. Now, of course, if I am broadcasting, if you're picking up my human appearance, that means you're about 6 feet away. And at the same time, I'm the same range from you. So you're broadcasting from your empty center, and I'm just far enough away to pick up your human. So that's called the law of equality, because in mutual, the range is the same. And if we back off, so I back way off and I observe you from, 100,000 miles or whatever, wherever the range of the moon is or one of the planets. If I'm that far away from your broadcasting station, you're no longer human. It's evolving as it progresses. And by that time, I'm picking up your planetary face, your planetary body, and I'm reporting to you that at this range, you're a planet. And this is where this is such a deeply kind of convention, common sense doesn't recognize that. No, you're just a person, you see. Well, you are at this range, but you're not at another range. But tradition has understood that the planet is alive, the living Earth, Gaia, all of that. So, I mean, it's been known, but what Douglas is doing is putting it in modern scientific terms with the help of relativity. Now, if I'm far enough away to be picking up the message and it's evolved to be a planet, well, you're at the same range from me, and you'll be picking up the message being broadcast from me at the same level. So I'll be a planet or a heavenly body. And of course, then I will receive, say I'm on the moon and I'm saying, well, from here, the message has evolved to the living planet. And and I tell you, that's what you are. I'm kind of projecting it back on you. There's that projection reflection. And you're doing the same to me. You're saying, well, I've got your moon face here, but it's over there at your center. So there's this continual exchange between centers, which is communication, which is, yeah, I find that thrilling. And the element of time and evolution that comes into it and the sense it makes. And it's not just simple. It is quite complex, because it's not simply that I receive I'm out at the place where you finally evolved to being a human. I also send it back to you. I say, well, I've got what you look like here, but if I point at where you are, that's what you are there. I tell you in no uncertain terms, you're a person there. You see, I've got you here, but you're there. And it's called the fallacy of simple location, that things are not simply there or here. They're there from here or here from there. And this was not something that Douglas invented. It was something that other philosophers around that time and before Whitehead were thinking of. But he took up many of these ideas and put them together in, with the central insight of your true nature being empty and full. Yeah.
And
Whoa.
the other thing I like, very related, is how um, he's very happy to. So some spiritual paths are all about divesting oneself from identities and from what I've read so far, Douglas seems very happy to have a multitude of identities there. Um, and the way he talks about, so very related to what you just said, if I can just read this, a couple of lines from when he talks about consider the word here, what do I mean by it? So he's looking at the wisdom embedded in language. Um, when I tell a dog to come here, I mean by that to come to the spot where I'm standing. When I talk about a football team is here, it means they've come to this town. So a town has come to this town. When a foreigner comes here, it's like, oh, the foreigners are here. I mean to this country. I've taken on the identity of the whole country. Or if the Martians were to invade Earth, I'd say, oh, the Martians are here, even if they'd landed in Australia and I'm in the UK. So it's very natural in language to take on, to expand our identities and to contract them down. And again, this is what I keep coming back to, this sense of like, oh, he takes something that someone else might consider trivial or just a quirk or peculiarity and sees great relevance and significance in it. And
Yeah, yeah. The other thing that sort of goes along with that is the idea of mind and body, and his way of understanding mind and body. And his way of understanding it is that the view out from the nothing is your mind. That's what you are capacity for. That's what you're receiving. That's your mind. And the view in from another center towards your center is your body. That's your appearance. Now, that means you can never actually directly experience your body because it's the view of others, your appearance in them, but you hear about it.
so can I just repeat that? So mind is what you experience and body is what others experience of you. Is that,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. And this is, in a way, it's probably you've got to think of this is a relationship with others. So it's never just, you can never see yourself directly. And the only way to see your appearance is through the eyes of others. So you have to accept that others are conscious. And then it's as if in empathy or imagination, you place yourself over at their center. So I'll place myself at your center, Amir, which is where what I'm doing is I'm acknowledging where you are as nothing, that you're looking out of a single eye, but that you have a view from there. Now, I never directly experienced that, but you tell me about it and I accept it. And part of that view you have of the world is a view of me, of what my center appears to be to you. So this is a transaction between two empty centers. My center here, which is empty, which is full of my mind, what I'm experiencing, that's what Douglas calls your mind. And your center there, which for you is full of your mind, but what it includes is your view of me, which I can't see, which he calls your body. Now, people say, well, what about the normal idea of your body and your mind? And so Douglas says, well, I mean, your view out, if you call it your mind, you can divide it up into different aspects if you like. And you can call part of it your thoughts and feelings, which you say is your mind, and part of it your body, this. But that is dividing up all of it is your mind. You're dividing your mind into a sort of psychological bit and a physical bit, which is useful for communicating and understanding. But that is a division of the mind because you never actually see your body. I never actually directly see my appearance. I'm reliant on others, you see. So mind and body, my mind is my view out of, and my body is the view from other centers in towards me. But they are interchangeable because what your mind is full of is my body. And what my mind is full of, my view out, is your body and your body and your body. So it's really that once you see that you are nothing at center, this frees you to be able to move to other centers. If you're a thing at center, you're stuck with that and you can't move, and that's what you are. But when you look and see that there's nothing at center, in principle, in empathy, in imagination, that means you're free to move and inhabit someone else's center because there's no difference. You know exactly what that center is like. It's empty and it's full. And then you see this is the developmental thing, which I just briefly touch on, was the baby's headless, and you don't have a developed sense of the consciousness of others. or of yourself. And growing up is learning to accept and understand that others are conscious and learning to place yourself in their shoes. That's empathy. So the only way you can become aware of yourself is through the eyes of others. My awareness of being Richard depends on my ability to place myself in others and see myself from there, or the mirror, or the camera, you see. Now, when you see who you are, you go even further in a way. You say, well, not only is that person in receipt of my appearance now, but they're looking at the same nothing as I am. And that's at the heart of the hierarchy, is the ability to what Douglas calls shift center. Because the center is nothing, it frees you to be able to place yourself in any center. And so everything you look at is a potential observation point. And so I look at a star, you see, and I can, with imagination and empathy, place myself. I know that that star is an appearance here in me, and it's taken a million years, maybe, or light years, a few light years to get here. You see, and I know that if I go towards it, I sort of go back in time and eventually reach the place where it is, where it's nothing. So that star has evolved. If I went up to it, no longer be a star, it'd be a planet. And if I went up to that, no longer be a planet, it'd be a bit of Earth. And I went up to that, going to the heart of the star is going towards that nothingness at the center, you see. So everything you look at is a potential observation point. A tree, a house, a star, a cloud. And it's only poverty of imagination that stops you placing yourself over there. It's the living universe. So let's say I take the star at night and I place myself in imagination over there and turn and imagine its view towards me, then I would see a star here. I wouldn't see Richard. And there you have that law of equality. Between empty centers, the exchange is equal because it's a mutual distance. Yeah. And this is, and then you get this ancient idea that the stars are looking down, that the stars are gods, that the stars are concerned with our machinations. Well, there you are. This is not new, but this is a new way that doesn't rely on Aristotle or whoever. It relies on science, and you're assuming that your direct experience is the same for everyone, really. Yeah. So you move from a universe that is just dead things to a universe that is observation posts, and what those things reveal themselves to you depends on your mutual range. And so now you look out, potentially, if you've got the imagination, you look out at the sky and it's a community of observers, all the stars. They're looking down on you, as the ancients said, but this is understanding it in a modern way. Or you look out at the planets, or you look out at other people, their observation points, or you look very close through a microscope at cells and their observation points, you see. So this is really rediscovering the living universe. Yeah. It's tremendous. It's tremendous. The whole
I'm
thing
just
is live. Yeah.
and just to pivot back to something you said earlier about distance, because it will segue into the next question I have, which is kind of the meat of what I promised we'd talk about. So this was all the preliminaries. what's the, what's the what's the opposite of the appendix just before books at the prologue? Um, so yeah, to come back to one more thing, which is this idea of distance. So I'm holding a pen up. Um, just in case anyone listens to this without looking at the video. So I'm holding a pen up, and the bottom of the pen is down, the top of the pen is up, and I can see its length very easily. And then if I hold it horizontally, I can see width very easily. But then if I hold the tip away from me, it disappears into a point.
Yes.
And um, again, if it's okay, I'll read a short part of what Douglas says about that is how that the two dimensions are given, breadth and height are given. We see those immediately, but depth is imputed or it's imagined because actually everything is two-dimensional. It's all right here, and yet I understand there to be depth. And then he says, it's a sound rule to regard few things as coincidental. So that's what I've been struck by today is how he's not taking anything as just trivial. It's like, oh, there might be significance here. Um, and just because we're familiar with a two-dimensional field is no explanation for it, because a 100-dimensional field is no more improbable. So I guess he's imagining like in a psychedelic trip where in the same way we see height and breadth, we could maybe see other dimensions without having to imagine them. The fact that I cannot picture my field with the depth of its contents given with the depth of their contents given, just as their height is given, is no more to the point than the fact that I cannot imagine a dozen primary colors. So, of course, I could imagine. So, it's very hard. Some animals apparently see more colors than us. And it's impossible for me to imagine what those might look like. But that doesn't mean it isn't theoretically possible for perception to include more. But our perception is constructed such that we're given height, we're given breadth, but we imagine depth. So what I actually find, which is that depth is not actually there as a given, has to be accepted in a spirit of humility and some significance extracted. And the significance here is tremendous. Not without awe, I realize that any distance which separates me from my object is a distance of my own making, which I understand to mean I've imagined it, or I'm not experiencing it directly. I've projected it out onto reality, as it were. In the same way, I think it's much simpler in this day and age, just because we've got Zoom. I imagine the sofa to be behind you, and the books to be behind you, and the wall to be behind you. But of course, they're all on a two-dimensional surface on my screen, but so easily my mind creates this sense of depth, of distance. Anyway, I just wanted to bring that in. I'll pause there. There's one more thing I want to say about that, which brings us to the next thing, but maybe I'll pause there in case you want to elaborate on any of that.
Uh, well, it's
Tell me if
true.
I get too excited and talk too quickly, by the way.
No, well, I do the same. I think it's a very exciting subject. Well, yes, you can measure across the view and you can measure vertically. But as you say, if you take a ruler and measure between any object and you, it shrinks to a point, and you lose the digits on the ruler. You can't measure it. But the thing that I think that Douglas is thinking about there, or at least what I take from it, is that it's never simple. It's always two sides to it. There's a paradox. So I'm looking out the window at a tree and I say, well, there's no distance. The tree is here. Yeah, I have the sense that the tree is there. And I have a sense that the house is further and the clouds are even further away. So I have this feeling of depth, and Douglas called that projection. So I receive the tree here, this appearance here, but I'm saying that I'm receiving it from the nothing over there. You see, I'm admitting, accepting, acknowledging that the appearance is an appearance of nothing over there, and it's traveled to me here. And what I do, that's reflection, is I project it back on its center and say that tree is there at its center. And this is that sense of depth. And the house is a bit further away. So I say, well, it's appearing here in me as a house. I know if I go up to it, it would just be a brick and then a molecule. But out up this range, I'm picking it up as a house. But I then project it back. I say it's over there at its center. So then when I look at night at the stars, I receive them here at no distance, but I'm understanding that that appearance is coming from nothing there, and I project it all the way back to the nothing there, so to speak. And the meaning that Douglas gets from this, if I can explain it, is that the first side of that experience is the mirror, and that is reflection. So everything is given here. And the meaning that comes out of that is that everything is me. And it's a kind of unifying thing that everything is given here. So I sort of gather it all, and it's all me, and so it's sort of oneness. And the second thing is that you then project it back out, the tree to that range, the house to that range, the cloud further, the star at night even further. And this is saying, actually, it's not here, it's there, and it's not me. It's not me. And it's not a kind of unity, it's a diversity of many, many different things. See, so the just accepting the solipsistic view that all is in you and there's only one consciousness and it's all here. That is true, but it's only half the story. And the other half of the story is you project everything out, and everything is an individual thing there. And this is the two sides, the one and the many. And I love that about the hierarchy, that it doesn't just focus on oneness or on manyness, but on both. And the other thing that he draws from this idea of projection and depth, because you can't directly measure how far the house is away. You understand it. You kind of take up a position from a third person and see yourself here and see the house there, and you know that distance. So you understand it from a secondary point of view. But even so, there is a sense that, in the sense that the object is there, and it's not you. And what Douglas takes from this is um, if it's all me, it's not really mysterious, it's me. But if it's all not me, it's other. It's other than me, and it's mysterious. And with this comes a kind of, well, a sense of mystery and otherness, which is absolutely fundamental to the hierarchy. The hierarchy is not simply everything is me. It's also everything is not me, and I have no idea what it is, and it's a great mystery. And it's not my own, me. It's not me. So those two go together, and that sense of mystery and otherness he equates with grandeur and majesty, and yeah, something like that.
Yeah, so he puts it here, the three moments, all stages, all necessary, the flat world here, undifferentiated from myself, the same world projected over there, made other than myself, and then the same world seen as both here and there, both myself and other than myself. Again and again, without the second stage of self alienation and the first stage of self identity, um, sorry, I misread that. Without the second stage of self alienation, the first stage of self identity is null and void. And now we get to the meat of the conversation as I advertised it. Again and again, in this inquiry, I shall come to the paradox of the self that can only recognize itself when it is wearing the disguise of the not self.
Yes. Well, you look at that in many different ways, and the only way I can find out about myself as Richard is by taking up your position and viewing myself from you. So the self and the other are absolutely bound up with each other and dependent on each other. Um,
And I
yeah.
think that's what I meant when it struck me. So the paths that I'm a little bit aware of, a bit of Buddhism and a bit of classic Tantra and various other, Advaita, non-duality. But what is striking me in reading this as very unique is from the very beginning and then woven all the way through is taking both views very seriously of recognizing the relationality between my view and other views, valuing all the different views and all the spectrums of identity. So it's not like, well, I need to get rid of that identity and only kind of merge with my true self or something like this. Um, and for me personally, what's starting to happen occasionally is a kind of liberation, a liberating sense of, oh, the whole spectrum of life is welcome. And I know lots of people say that, but somehow it's different when it starts to feel true for me through this reflection. Um, and I think it was on maybe it was Sam Harris podcast or somewhere else that you said, oh, you went through a period of trying to get rid of yourself. there's maybe based on some traditions of like, okay, we need to get rid of this sense of identity of being a Richard or something. And then you had some kind of recognition or acceptance or realization of like, oh, that's not the game you're here to play necessarily.
No, and the hierarchy is a celebration of yourself at all the different levels. It I think it may dovetail with that consideration, just stepping back and acknowledging the overall pattern of the hierarchy and the book. And put very, very simply, Douglas is asking, who am I? And he asks the observers of himself, what do they see, you see? Because you can't see yourself. And so he asks the observers, and of course the observer says, well, you're a person, but oh, hang on, if I step back, you're not just that, you're also a society. But hang on, if I step back further, you can't be a society without the rest of life. And if I physically move further back, then life can't exist without the planet. And I step back further, and the other planets and the sun come into view, and the planet can't exist without the whole star, which can't exist without the whole galaxy. So, in other words, as you're zooming away and reporting what I am at these different levels, which I identify with and feel for my country and my family and my planet and even my star if we were attacked by another star, you see. So all this makes sense, but there's a problem, because whenever you looking at me as a planet, you're seeing part of me, but you're not seeing the rest of me, which would include the other planets, that I'm dependent on, if you want to put it like that. So the observer has to step back to include the other planets. So they step back, outside the solar system onto another star. And then you see, that's my solar body, you see. So that's the only really, you need at least a solar body to be able to breathe, to exist. But then the observer says, well, solar body can't exist without the other, the rest of the galaxy. So the only way to see your galactic body is for the observer to step to another galaxy. You've got to go outside. So there's this regression that goes on with the observer taking in more and more of you. But the more it takes in, the more there is to take in, because the observer is always looking from some vantage point, and you've got to then include that one. And there's a point in the hierarchy where Douglas says, well, you can never get into view the whole of yourself, because the observer is always looking from somewhere, and you've got to keep including that. And so the whole project of self-knowledge, which is what the hierarchy, greater and greater self-knowledge about yourself, that, greater understanding, falls over in the end, because you can never finally take it all in. And even you might say that you could posit that there's a point where you get so far away, it just sort of fades out, all the stars blink out, or, you get so far away, there's nothing to see. So what Douglas says, so the only remedy when you accept that self-knowledge, although a fantastic journey and so much to discover, the project of attempting to know yourself fails in the end. And the remedy is to return all the way down through all the layers, taking off all these clothes and these identities as you go, all the way down until you get back down to the center where there's nothing, and then turn around and be capacity for the whole that you could never get into view from the outside. And this is the giving up of kind of thinking that you can grow and grow and grow to become everything, and this return to the center and surrender to being nothing, room for everything. And this is a traditional spiritual journey of the mystic, you see, of the mystic's journey towards God, towards wholeness, towards growing and growing, and in the end having to give up everything and let go of everything. But this letting go is letting go at the center, which now includes all those identities, which are so precious, which in this journey you've discovered so much about your, that your human personality, but your galactic personality, your solar personality, your cellular personality, and these have long histories and futures and all of that. So the time element comes in, but yeah, I'm not quite sure how that quite dovetails with this idea that, uh, well, this observation that you don't have to, I think the way to put it is you don't have to get rid of yourself. You just got to see in order to see who you really are, you just got to see your center self is not central. It's something that's going on between you and other observers. It's something there. Yeah.
And maybe just to clarify, because let's say Ramana Maharshi would use self, or different traditions use self to mean slightly different things, or sometimes the opposite thing. So when you say self here, and I think Douglas as well, when he says the disguise of the not self, he actually means the opposite of what I think Buddhists mean. So he means I take on the disguise, I'm pretending to see myself through your eyes, not through
Yes.
myself. And then I can see this kind of social identity that I have, but only through others' eyes. So when
Yes.
he says self, he's talking about this kind of social self, and the not self is the view from outside, the imagined
Yeah.
view from outside. Yeah,
That's right. Yeah.
yeah.
That's right. Yeah.
And I suppose the other reflection I had around that uh, which for me pulls widely away from um, any kind of nihilism, is in this in the same way a bowl can serve its function by virtue of the empty space that's in it. I think that's in the Tao Te Ching or something like this. Or a house is useful because it has a door. It needs that empty space to walk in. And if I had a head here, I wouldn't be able to see yours. All I'd have is a big fat head in my way. So by being empty of a head that I'm space for yours. And then I was thinking, I don't know if I read it in the book or I thought it or read it somewhere else, but reflecting more on meaning of like, oh, it's all so utterly meaningless. And that wide open space that's meaningless is space for meaning. So you can imbue your life with all sorts of different meanings precisely because there isn't a given meaning. There isn't like a one prescribed, inherent, God said, do this. It's like, no, it's empty of that. So there's space for meaning by virtue of having no meaning, or there's space for this identity. Um, or as a former dancer, yeah, it took me, I think I came to one of the gatherings early on in this discovering headlessness, and I can't remember if I was speaking to you or someone else, but I remember because you like to lead dances, and the hands come in and out of the view. And it's like, oh, thank God I hadn't discovered this whilst I was still trying to be a professional dancer because it'd be so disorienting. Like this kind of floating head and the world spinning around all the time, and I've got no idea what I look like. How am I meant to, how am I meant to perform a choreography? And now, some years later, it's integrated to the point like, oh, because I think I asked you and you said, oh, it's both. You're constantly going back and forth. And now it's like, okay, there is the world spinning around and there is an empty space here. And there's what I know through by using mirrors and cameras and teachers telling me this looks good and that doesn't look good. I can project what you see of me and paint that in other people's
Yeah.
consciousness, as it were, because there's space
Yes.
for that. Yeah.
Yes. Well, I mean, to become aware of your appearance in the mirror and through others, it is potentially to improve your ability to communicate because you're aware of how you're going down. If you're just headless and you've no idea of what you look like, your appearance, that is not going to work very well in terms of understanding how to get your point across or to communicate. Yeah.
Mm.
The thing is that it sorts out the location or the difference between the central self, which is empty for the world, and the peripheral self, which is a person or a star or a planet. But let's say the person, it's a matter of location, that I have a self, I am Richard. but I'm not Richard centrally. I discover who I am through others. So it's a kind of something happening between your empty center and my empty center. And my awareness of you as Amir is something that's both I'm receiving here and I attribute to you there. And it's at center, we're not a person at center, we're not a planet at center, we're not a molecule at center, we're this nothing, and peripherally or in between the two centers is our human self. And then there's no argument, there's no decision to make about whether or not it's a good thing to acknowledge your human self or have a self, or does it get in the way of seeing who you really are? It doesn't at all. It doesn't at all. You're locating it where it belongs and where it doesn't belong.
Mm.
Even though everyone tells you it's here, you understand that because they are receiving it over there and projecting it back on you. But you say, well, I'm empty for you here, and I do the same to you. Yeah.
And the other thing, or maybe just to pause and say, if anyone listening wants to put a question in the chat, um, now would be a great time. We'll come to that in a second. Uh, Katie, Trevor, or Ibrahim, or if you have a reflection that you want to share, just say in the chat. And if you want to share that on camera, then we'll invite that in a moment. Um, but the other reflection I wanted to share about what I am enjoying about the Headless Way or Douglas's approach is um, you're probably familiar, Richard. There's this what's sometimes called, is it radical non-duality? There's certain teachers that they will get on stage and they'll say, well, there's nothing to do, there's no one here, there's nothing to do about it. And I've actually enjoyed some of those meetings. So nothing I say here and now is meant to valid or interesting or um, approach, but it uh, it what can happen to people is they're sat there bewildered, like, well, there's nothing to do, but you're having an experience that I'm not, and I've paid my £15 to try and have your experience, and the teaching seems to indicate that I'm seeing something that you're not seeing. And then there's the other approach, which is like, well, maybe in 100 lifetimes you'll get this thing. It's not that there's nothing to do. You've got a soul that's going to reincarnate, and eventually you're going to get it. And the Headless Way is this perfect, it's my impression now, it's not something I've read in this book, but my experience of it in this moment is the Headless Way is this perfect middle way between both. It's like, um, it is very radical because there is nothing to do, but it can be seen now. And it's not, I'm
Yes.
not have, and I, as the teacher, if I was to share it, I'm not having a special experience different from you. It's like you can see it right now. It's not like just hoping and luck, and maybe you'll come to a few more meetings and then suddenly, yeah. And um,
Yes. Well, exactly. And another way of thinking about it is in this direction, you can't do anything, whether you like it or not. There's nothing here to do, and no
yeah,
one here to do it.
there's nothing to do. It's already there.
Yeah, but in that direction, you can't not do. You're always doing.
Always.
You have the perfect balance between what is true for everyone, that at the center of the hub of the wheel, it's still for everyone and idle, and there's nothing to do and nowhere to go, and you can't. I mean, it's not an achievement, it's just observation. But in that direction, that you're then relieved of the idea that you've got to somehow do nothing there or be still there, because you never will. And in that direction, that's life, and that's doing, and that is evolving. And you have the perfect combination of the two, and that's the way you're built. And so you're not trying to impose the perfection of the source, the center, the stillness on the world. You accept it's moving, it's busy, it's life, and it comes from the stillness. So yeah, you have best of both worlds.
Yeah, it's constructed that way. And
Yeah, that's right.
there's nothing to do, and yet you can write 600-page book about it.
I know. I know. At the end of the first chapter of On Having No Head, Douglas, the first chapter is describing his experience of headlessness, and he locates it in the Himalayas, which is a story and a half. But anyway, at the end of that chapter, he said, and I, noticing this, as it were, something like there's a great peace descended on me, and I realized, something like there's nothing to do and there's nothing to say. And then he should have put in brackets, and then I spent the rest of my life talking about it.
Even within the Headless Way community, for want of a better word, people take a variety of approaches to how they engage with this. Um, I know some people have made it either a goal or a path or a curiosity to spend more and more time noticing headlessness or noticing the empty center. And, that there's no reason not to do that. I feel like it's as valid as I could spend my life getting very good at playing piano, or I could great study insect behavior, or I could just narrow my um, focus or interest in how things move and how I can move beautifully, or I can get more and more curious about this empty space from which everything comes out. Um, oh, great. And there's a question from Ibrahim, so we'll get to you in a second. But just to round off this question, I wonder if there's other trends that you see in the community of people that explore this, which strike you like, oh, there's some people that kind of engage with it this way or that way. Is there anything you can say about the trends that you notice in terms of how people take this up in their lives?
Yes, I think it's something I notice in myself and in the community, because there's a community of seers online and community of friends who value this. And
Seers being people who've seen
yeah,
headlessness and
yeah,
appreciate
and
it. Yeah.
valuing it and finding out how beneficent it is in their lives and sharing and gaining a lot from sharing and seeing things from other centers, other points of view. So, on the one hand, there's a deepening joy at the fact that you're home, you've got it, it's 100% available. It's always available. You can see it. You can't do it wrong, and your expression is valid but different from everyone else's. And so, in a certain sense, that there is nothing to do and all of that. So that's deep, deep relaxation comes from that, or deepening relaxation. Let me put it like that. But only this morning, got up early and I was just sitting with a cup of coffee, and I thought, Richard, that is true. You don't have to worry at all. It's always there. It's got your back. It's on your side. But it is important to be aware of it. And that it's a paradox. And it's important that society becomes aware of this. And so it's important to broadcast it and communicate about it and do what we're doing now. This is really important in society because this insight is such a game changer. Face to no face is a game changer. If you take that seriously and you live it and act from it, I am you. I am space for you. Uh, this is namaste in action, and all of that. So I see that. Um, I see both the kind of the paradox, both the realization that you're home, there's nothing to do. This is the joy that you're home. You really are home. I mean, it's the real deal. It's not a belief. And that is what's so astonishing. It's just self-evidently true here and now. And at the same time, my God, this is important. And this is something that deeply I want to find out more about and explore and discover, and that you do that in a community through communication. Like now, you find out what is under the surface by opening your mouth. Anyway, Ibrahim has got a comment or a question, I think.
So hi, first, thanks a lot, Richard and Amir, for this event. I'm actually very new to the methodology, to the concept, so I'm also trying to catch up with all those new concepts. But generally, I've been very thoughtful recently about how I'm viewing myself in general, and this resonates so much on the way I'm headless. And I had also a couple of thoughts about it before, like about the whole idea of why I can't see myself. and can see others. I see it very like very helpful, the way we look at others and we look at ourselves, and this whole concept of projections and reflections and so on. It just struck me during the discussion that just for fun, that I won't actually be able to see really physically my face my whole life until I die. This will not happen. And although I know this, I haven't realized that except while watching this, that I can only see myself in the mirror or through the eyes of others. So yeah, it just still trying also to catch up with the idea, like it's still very strong in myself that I will not see that
Yeah.
face I see now in the camera, except until I die, like I will not see it by my mere eye, by pure eyes. Which is not very scary, I would say, because I still can use the camera and the mirror. But this idea, I mean, is I don't know. It's a little
Oh,
also.
well, yeah. I mean, every so often I consider that fact in some
Yeah,
depth, that I can't ever see myself. And there are certain moments when I feel quite disturbed because
yeah.
others can see you and you can't. And what do they know that you don't know?
Exactly,
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, and surprisingly, I've only been disturbed by it now. Like it never disturbed me. It just now I got this deep realization: this will not happen ever. Will
I
not happen.
know.
My eyes will not see this face, which is still okay. I mean, it just the realization of it. It's a bit new.
Well, uh, I mean, it's as if we've grown up thinking we can see ourselves. And when it occurs to us that you can never and will never, that can be a bit of a shock. But the rather neat thing that you could say is, well, I can never see my human self, but I'm not in the right position to see myself. Everyone else is, but I'm not positioned to be able to see myself. But I am perfectly placed to see my true self, the
Like,
space. I can see that, and actually no one else can see it when they look at me. They see, so
yeah,
we have different advantages.
I was lucky enough to work on this film where we were playing zombies actually, but they were going to use a combination of our own movement with CGI and other things. So what they would do is they would create 360 um, images of us with cameras all around, kind of like the Matrix. So they could construct a 3D model of what we looked like, and then later the CGI people could play around with that 3D model and make the body do all sorts of things that we hadn't necessarily done in the studio. And what they said was they would, for for each actor, they would then construct a like plastic model of the person's head. And what would happen again and again is actors would come in and see and not they had never seen their own head in 3 dimensions. That's the extent to
yeah,
which a two-dimensional face just doesn't look the same as a three-dimensional
yeah,
face. Similar to when we hear our own voice recorded for the first time, like, who's that strange voice? Because we don't hear our voice the way other people hear our voice. I was sharing this anecdote, Richard, about I'd worked on a film where they made like plastic cast or plastic for some CGI purposes. They made three-dimensional plastic casts of our heads, and the person making them said it's very common that people come into the studio, see their head for the first time in 3 dimensions, and not
yeah,
recognize it because it looks so
yeah.
different from the
Okay.
two-dimensional representations. That's the extent to which, wow, but
Wow,
we'll never see it
wow.
here. Yeah, it's quite
Yeah,
quite
yeah.
something.
Yeah, I can just say that I can totally relate to it now. Just
Yeah.
this feeling, it's there, and yeah,
The other thing that goes with it that I was going to get on to was this recognition that you never will see yourself, and others can. And that this gives, it seems, as you grow up, it sort of gives an underlying sense that others have an authority, that they know about you, and you're dependent on them because you can't see yourself. And so you kind of hand over your authority because everyone else has the information and you're dependent on it. And this can also lead to gaslighting, which is, the abuse of control, really, that someone says, well, you're this. I said, I don't think I am. He said, no, you are. Because you've nothing that directly can oppose their view because you can't see. And if everybody around you starts telling you, that you've got a head and you can't never see it, what do you do but believe them, you see? But what that the good thing that comes out of that, if you have the courage, really, which is the Headless Way, is saying, well, all right, I admit that you have a view of me that I don't have. So in a certain sense, you are an authority on me because I've got no direct information about that. But I am an authority on what it's like here, which is I am
Yeah.
headless and I am space of the world. And you're not an authority on that.
Yes.
It's a matter of then standing up to what everyone says. You say, well, look, you are an authority because from there, but you're not an authority from here. And I here discover that what seems like a disadvantage, that I can't see myself, is a huge advantage because I can see who I really am. And so it turns it around. And you, instead of losing confidence because everyone knows who you are and you don't, you still have that. But then you start to draw on this deep, deep assurance because this is your direct experience, not as a person, but as the vast open space that contains everything. And that turns everything around. Yeah.
Thank you. That's quite helpful. I think like I'm the only one who has the authority to know how is it like to be me,
Yes.
and to be here from this
Yes.
vantage point, seeing the whole world like that way. And now it's easier. Now it's even
Yeah.
better. Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah.
And the other thing was, can this realization actually sort of bridge the gap between knowing when to consider myself just as pure awareness and when to also make use of my individuality and person in life in general? Because I see, as far as I followed, like there is this idea of accepting all perspectives. Also, like as we were talking about it, we still need I think we still need to consider both, like just being pure awareness and also consider our personality as something that we need to have. We are the way we are for a reason too. So yeah.
Yes, I totally agree with you there that as soon as you accept that there are others, then there are many points of view. And this then in effect means that you value your unique point of view. And you must stay true to that. That's your unique contribution in the universe, your unique view from this center that, from the nothingness. And to dismiss the value of that or the reality of that seems to me just to be denying reality and not enjoying and the tremendous kind of thrill of having a unique perspective. Yeah.
Right. Right.
Yes.
Yeah. Good. Yeah. Thanks a lot.
Yes. Well, delight to meet you, Ibrahim.
Yeah, my pleasure. My pleasure, Richard.
Yes.
Thanks.
Thank you.
And
Yeah.
we can, for example, understand now that in a certain sense, you have your face and I have mine, but in a certain sense, we trade faces.
Right. Right. Yeah.
And we
Yeah.
can hold both perspectives,
Yeah. I think
which
that's
is,
what
yeah.
what is it all for, I guess. Yeah. Like
Yes, exactly.
yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
And I think to add on to that, Richard, is um, you have the privilege or authority or perspective to see me from the outside and I have the privilege and authority to experience that from the first person. And
Yeah,
that's unique and special. And there's personality traits and thoughts and ways of navigating the world that happen to show up here that it would seem strange to dismiss those. Well, that's the perspective I'm having today. Um,
I agree totally.
yeah.
And your unique view includes me, and my unique view includes you.
Right.
I've learned a little bit more about Kashmiri Shaivism or classic Tantra recently. And I understood from a scholar talking about that is because you had non-duality, Advaita, and those things that would predominantly see the world as an illusion and therefore as something to dismiss. It would mainly generate ascetics who would negate the world and not consider it important to be involved in the world. I don't know. This is things that I've heard from Harish Christopher Wallace, the scholar. Um, and then he was saying the distinction that was made um, in Kashmir Shaivite or classic Tantra tradition around 1000 AD in India was okay, all reality is consciousness, that's true, but consciousness is inherently dynamic. It's inherent to consciousness to manifest, for all these things to kind of come out of it or show up in it. And therefore, they are equal, they are the movements of, to use the G word, God, and to be taken as seriously and to be cherished as much as the empty, open, spacious.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
yeah, so I wonder if that's a view that had been compared much in the headless community or by Douglas, or if that's.
yeah. Two-way. Actually, I mean, it's very funny because I just had to go to the door. The bell rang, and it was the postman. And I bought something on eBay, and it's just arrived. And what it is a Roman ring. I bought an ancient Roman ring, and one of the god, or Janus, I think, is the god who looks two ways. Have you heard of Janus? I think is
No,
well.
but I'd love to see.
This is it's probably a bit hard to see on here, but this is a Roman ring, and it's got a head on it, and it's looking both ways. You
Uh-huh,
can't see it. You can't see it. I don't think
more or
it's
less.
out of
Right.
focus. But that's the two-way thing. The God, there's a face looking one way and a face on the other side looking the other way, two-way. And this is the two-way. It's not just the emptiness, it's also the fullness and valuing the fullness. And not just being God, it's being a person as well, and a planet and a star and all of that. So it's inclusive and not fundamentalist.
It brings to mind another myth. Do you know Patrick Harper at all? He wrote The Philosopher's Secret Fire, and he's kind of charted the history of traditions that relate, I think, to this through the West. Um, and he was struck very much by the image of, I don't remember the Greek myth, who went to slay the Medusa,
Oh yeah, Perseus
Perseus,
and the
and the
Gorgon.
way
Yeah,
and the way he did that was by walking backwards with a reflection.
yeah,
So it kind of has this kind of sense of like, well, I'm working my way backwards to it by looking forwards, reflecting backwards, and to slay this kind of solidifying um, entity, this thing that wants to solidify everything and make it kind of concrete, and it doesn't move, it doesn't change. It's like, well, actually, no. If I look at it in this perspective, anyway. So yeah, it just struck me as
yes. Well,
poetically
I mean,
related.
another way of thinking about that is that everyone is Medusa. If you looked at Medusa and she looked back, you were turned to stone. That was the power she had. She petrified you, which means being turned to stone or frightened out of your wits. And when other people look at you and feed back to you what they see, they make a thing of you and they
Yeah,
turn you to stone. And the way to defend yourself against this is by looking in the mirror of your true nature, which frees you of what they tell you you are. So it's, yeah, in these myths, there's, the deep knowledge that's probably uh, knowledge that the people who told the stories weren't even conscious of sometimes. Yeah. But
yeah,
it's there. It's there. Yeah.
yeah. Um, Okay, well, this has been fantastic. Is there anything else you want to add just on that theme of integrating awakening or seeing, to use the headless way
Yes.
terminology, into everyday
Well,
life that you
on the
want to
back of
add
what
before we end?
yeah, sorry, I interrupted there, but on the back of what we've been talking about, that you can only know yourself through others. In a certain sense, you can only know your true nature through others, because in terms of understanding, it's a social thing. And this is very obvious, really, that if you have friends who are aware of their true nature, which means that you can exchange your views and insights and reactions and all of that, everybody learns. So it's the way to learn is to be with friends that are valuing this and to take time out to share. And there is an online community who meet through Zoom, and people are very welcome if you're interested in this to drop in and join us. It's free. So just that's my thought in terms of maintaining it and keeping it going. It's much more fun and easier to do it in a society than, so as it were, so-called on your own. Yeah.
And maybe we should do some promo then for doing a retreat. You just reminded
Ah,
me.
yeah. Very good.
We're doing a 4-day retreat where there'll be about 25 people. Um, Probably most conversational. Some of this has been a bit intellectual, maybe. So this is probably less intellectual, more experiments. It's around beautiful nature.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we did it last year, and it was great fun down in Devon in the UK. And you also have another gathering that will be released soon in Salisbury in that happens in
July. Yeah.
July. Is it?
Yeah.
July.
Yeah. That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
Great.
a delight to go down the rabbit hole with you, Amir, and
Yeah, it's so much
Ibrahim
fun.
and Katie, and well, whoever's here. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you.